Good afternoon. Today's session of Something to Talk About, we're going to talk about the topic of vulnerability. That raw strength to come forward in your authentic self, even when you might feel that doing that could be risky. And for today, I am privileged to be able to introduce you to a person who I call a friend. And I don't mean in a casual sense, I mean in a deep sense. Michael Burke. Michael is an accomplished, successful entrepreneur who has an extensive background in sales management and executive coaching. Actually, I met Michael many years ago. Professionally, we worked for the same company. But our relationship quickly shifted or grew from a professional one to a strong personal friendship. I have spent hours and hours talking to this man about every topic under the sun that affects life, living, and your personal beliefs. And he is one of the people that I go to on a regular basis to just do a gut check about where I am. He will give me the raw truth when I want it and when I don't. And so I felt that the greatest gift I could give to you was to share him with my audience. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Michael Burke.
Hi, Lynn, and hello, everybody. That's a heavy introduction, so I feel like I'm being put on the spot, but I'll take it.
One of the things that I've shared with you when we talked about doing this episode was that this topic is such a broad topic. It's just hard to even know kind of where to land or where to take off. And so let me start by asking you, Mike, the topic of vulnerability and authenticity. How did you fall in love with that topic? How did it start for you?
First, I'm going to separate for you, or for me anyway, vulnerability and authenticity. When you said that in the beginning, it made me think about, I don't think the two are connected that way. I don't think that somebody who is being their authentic self is necessarily vulnerable. So I would separate those two words because certainly years ago, I was my authentic self, and I was not vulnerable, or not to the degree that I am vulnerable now. So I don't know if the two connect that way.
Fair enough.
But that's just my thought when you this last time when I heard it, you said authentic self and vulnerability, and I wonder about those two words being used together. So maybe that's just something to ponder for the listeners, right? I came across, I always thought I'll use the word sensitive as a guy. I was raised by mother and father, but my mother had 5 sisters, and my grandmother lived with me, my mother's mother. And so I thought I was a little bit more sensitive as a man because I was raised by a lot of women. And every day when I came home from school, my grandmother was there and she taught me a ton. I also had men in the family who married those sisters and my mother, who sometimes had challenges, and sometimes they were, what's the word I want to use? Not necessarily supported for who they were because, they were doing male stuff. So I'll just leave it there. So vulnerability for me, I was married and started going through the first parts of divorce, which are separation or the challenges that you have in a relationship when the two of you are not connecting. And my ex-wife used to say, I wish we were more connected. And I didn't really know what that meant because connection to me looked like what I was doing. I thought I was a caretaker. I was a caretaker, not I thought I was. I took care of my family. I took care of my wife. I did the things that I thought a man should do. And yet she was saying, I wish we were more connected. And what she was talking about was different than connection looked like for me based on how I was raised, based on my nurture and my nature. She was talking about an emotional connection at a level beyond the emotional connection that I had, which, the more open you are emotionally, the more vulnerable you are. So vulnerability showed up as I started going through the process of trying to understand and save my marriage and going back into therapy. And I can tell you about the journey, but we'd be on this podcast for a long time.
Okay. So you're kind of at this critical point in your life, and so you begin to start looking at your, should I say, willingness to be open?
For me, what I've learned is that it's not a to do, it's a to be. So in other words, if you're not vulnerable, you can't just flip the switch and say, I'm going to be vulnerable. Because what I found out was that there were things blocking my ability to be emotionally open. I was emotionally closed. In order to be open emotionally, then I had to do some work and figure out what was the blockage. What was blocking my ability to feel, my ability to be more open, my ability to be more present, to feel the energy and the emotion happening in any situation. It wasn't just in a romantic situation, it was in any situation, to connect to the emotion that was happening at the time, right? For instance, I could go to a movie and the whole place is crying and people have their tissues when they come out. And to me, it was just a movie. And so I would never allow myself I was blocking my ability to feel the emotion that everybody else was feeling. Well, not everybody else, but many of the people. And I think it's something that emotionally closed people do. They're not necessarily vulnerable to movies. They're just movies, right? They're not, oh, it's a great movie. Whereas some person's still crying, coming out because they're feeling the intention and the intent of the emotion that's happening in that space. To me, it was a movie.
Okay, so let me ask you, you mentioned this whole divorce scenario, and you mentioned your ex-wife saying something to you about her wishing that you two were more connected. When you're looking at vulnerability, do does a person just know they're not open, or is it usually that there is a trigger, a comment, a request from some externally that makes you aware of the fact that you're not open in a way that maybe somebody else needs for you to be?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the nail. I think there are degrees of open, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all come to, our lives at wherever we are, based on how we were raised and what our experiences have been, right? How we're nurtured and how nature has impacted us. So, I grew up in a home where I didn't see a lot of emotion in my family in terms of, I'm going to call it intimacy for lack of a better word. When I say intimacy, holding hands, kissing, hugging, the things that emotion and open emotion show. I didn't see a lot of that. I saw a lot of being taken care of, right? Being, if you fell, put the Band-Aid on. If you, when you go out, we all go together as a family. But in terms of, I didn't see my mother and father come in the house and my father kissed my mother every day that he walked in the door, or vice versa when he left. She gave him his lunch. He said, "I'll see you later, Sue, and see you when I get home." And that's how that was. The most intimate thing I saw them do is dance. When they danced together, hand dancing, I could see a whole nother level of emotion. The way they looked in each other's eyes, the way they smiled, the way they, because they were hand dancing. So they were holding and spinning and turning. And it was a whole different level of emotion. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Right. But I didn't see that in the day to day. Right. So, and, we grew up in a place where part of the nomenclature was life is hard, suck it up, or that's just how life is, you'll be okay. It was that, be tough, because they had to teach us how to hang in this society, in this world that we're in as Black folks. So, it was that tough upbringing. I got a story, I was walking down, I was at a conference in Cambridge, Maryland, and a young lady and her husband and the little boy were walking out of the conference center. And the little boy he had to be, maybe he was 4 years old or something like that, 4 or 5. He was running in front of them and he fell and he scraped his knee. And the father was ahead of the mother. And he picked the little boy up and said, "What's the matter with you?" And he was crying, "I hurt my knee, I hurt my knee." And he was like, "Stop crying, stop crying. Men don't cry." That's what he said to a 5-year-old boy. Men don't cry, right? Oh, and about, 10 seconds, the mother was up on the husband and said, "Give me my son." And she took her son and she hugged him and she said, "Your knee okay, baby?" And she gave him the love that he needed. And he stopped crying and they took care of the knee and they went on, right? But that always resonated with me of if that young man is 5 and that's how his father is teaching him, and I get it, right? That's how you teach someone to be a man. I mean, we're going to play football, we're going to play sports, or we're going to get hurt, and we don't cry. Maybe, right? But when you're really hurt, what do you do with the pain? And if at 5 years old, he's pushing away that pain, over how many years is he pushing away his emotion, the hurt emotions, the sad emotions, because he's not supposed to cry? And then what happens when that triggers 20 years later, and that all that stuff he pushed down inside all of a sudden comes out for something somebody says that had nothing to do with that particular situation? Because we don't process what we push away. It's in shadow.
No,
That's another piece, but
no, I hear you. And as you were talking, I thought about a friend of mine who was one of 3 or 4 boys in a family, and they lost their mother when they were, I think the oldest might have been 8 or 9, and the youngest might have been 5, maybe. And their father did an excellent job of teaching them how to be a man, but there was no one there to say, "Give me my baby," and let me take a look at your knee, and the soft side. And so you're right. People are taught how to show up publicly. And I think many of us are taught, even little girls. I mean, no, we don't go through the same. That's how you are a man. But I recall growing up and being told there are certain hurts, certain slights, certain feelings that you have that you don't talk about. You deal with them personally, privately, in the quiet. Um, and that's tough, because if you learn how to master that art form, when you grow up and get married and you have a partner, now you got to learn how to open up. Who's there to show you how to do that? So let's talk about, as you grew or learned more about vulnerability, were there steps you took in the process to help you get to this new place?
Well, first of all, I was trying to, honor my vows. And in honoring my vows, I was doing the work to see if we had the ability to, we were separated at the time, living in different houses, if we were going to continue to work on our relationship or if we were not, right? Because a relationship to me is two people working in the same direction. But as I recognized some of my stuff that I had to deal with to be a better man and therefore be a better husband, I started going down the path on my own of figuring out why I couldn't feel and why I couldn't emote or allow myself to be in the movie with everybody else. What's that about? And that came through counseling. And then I did a whole bunch of self-prescribed anecdotes to try to figure out, well, what's going on with Michael? And, I was 50 something years old. So it wasn't like I was already, a grown man, but I wanted to know, why didn't I feel and why couldn't I feel what everybody else was feeling in the movie or what most of the people were feeling, right? So I tried to peel back the onion to some of the things I mentioned to you, like seeing my family dance, because even the women in my family have, I have a cousin who is a very soft, gentle, loving cousin, male, who likes to hug and hold, and his wife is uncomfortable when somebody pulls up on her like that, or sneaks up behind her, or wants to hold her hand all the time. And so it's not a male or female thing. It's a, what's your constitution kind of thing, right?
Right,
Where
right.
he's the person that's vulnerable and she's the person that's not comfortable being vulnerable, right?
Or at least
So,
in that area,
um,
she's not.
well, at least not in that area, correct. And that's the area that I was focused on, because my vulnerability was about being emotionally connected and being able to have a different level of intimacy in my marriage and in my life, to be honest with you. So, but what I found was, when you become more open, you have a greater sense of your emotions and your senses, and you see and feel things you feel things that you didn't feel, that have nothing to do with level of intimacy or anything like that. You're better connected to nature. You're better connected to other people's feelings and emotions, that you may see something. It's just a whole completely different. I'm a different person now. I can cry on a commercial sometimes, and who knows why, right? Because that commercial moves me, and I'm like, my daughters are looking at me like, okay, Dad, it's just a commercial, right? And I would hide that before, right? I wouldn't hide it before because I wouldn't have felt that. But if I was doing it and I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, if I wasn't willing to take the risk that my girls wouldn't laugh at me because I was crying on a commercial, then there's two parts of the vulnerability. There's the risk part, right? A lot of people won't take the risk to show their feelings. I mentioned to you before, I was talking to a friend, and he was saying that his wife's very kind of a type A and not real emotional. And so when he's a very emotional guy, but when he gets emotional, he turns away so that she doesn't see him being emotional, right? So look at the dynamics of vulnerability playing out in
Mm.
relationships and friendships and all of that kind of stuff, right? What would be the benefit or the opportunity for them if he was able to show her that emotion, right? Is he not willing to take the risk because she'll laugh at him? Is he not willing to take the risk because, what's the risk? It's who he is. So when you talk about authenticity, I think he's a pretty authentic person. Yet in that space, he's
He
not being
can't be.
authentic.
He can't be. Or he doesn't feel
Yeah,
he can be.
right. So that's why I separate sometimes authenticity from vulnerability in
Vulnerability.
that respect. Yeah.
So okay. What I'm trying to do is perhaps one, define it, and I think we're doing that. But you talked about anecdotal things that you did. You talked about getting therapy. short of, for a person who is not at a, I'm going to call it a crisis point, just because, to define it other than your day-to-day living. I'm wondering if there always needs to be a trigger, an external trigger that helps you begin the journey down the path to vulnerability. Or do you just know you're not being vulnerable? And if it's external or internal, what steps could you employ to try to begin that work? Am I making any sense?
Well, certainly, triggers and yeah, I think certainly triggers in life make us do something, right? So yeah, a lot of times the trigger is an impetus for us to do something about it or not, right? So certainly a divorce or a situation can, force you to or make you want to learn more about a certain thing. I'm writing a book, because I think when I talk about this topic with other people, they always say, as soon as the book's written, please make sure I have a copy. So now I'm gonna put that to the test. I've never written a book before, and sometimes I wonder if I have enough content, but I'm going to try to do my best to write something that somebody could pick up and say to themselves, I know what Michael's talking about. I feel like him, and he went through something. Maybe it'll help me. Maybe that will be a trigger for somebody or a support for somebody who is not necessarily vulnerable. Since my divorce, I have coached other men and women who are going through divorce and help them either understand themselves, particularly men, because a lot of women leave men because of lack of vulnerability or lack of emotional connection, right? They take out I've heard several women, when I say what I'm writing, talk about how men, and I'm not picking on men, I'm just telling you what the women say, what they have said to me at a bar or sitting down having sushi or whatever it is, that, and even men have said, I come home from work and I take out the trash, I do all the things I'm supposed to do, and then we go to bed and I push up against her and nothing happens, right? Well, that's not necessarily intimacy. Not a lot of foreplay in that, not a lot of emotional connection in that, which is what the woman has said to them in words that they're trying to understand, right? I'll give you one of my stories. One of my friends was telling me about, he's married. He was having challenges in his relationship around intimacy. And so he was traveling. He was a sales guy, and he was going to other marketplaces, and he met this executive assistant in one of their other offices, and he went out shopping with her, and he was so excited about that. And he was like, yeah, man, I went shopping, man. It just reminded me of how a woman can be. And I looked at him and I was like, okay, but I know his wife. And I'm like, I know she loves to shop. I said, when's the last time you went shopping with your wife? And he was like, oh, it's been a long time. I said, and you're wondering about level of intimacy. I said, why don't you go shopping with her one day? I said, just take a day, half a day, go shopping, let her try on the clothes, be in the dressing room with her, just make it a whole shopping kind of experience, right? Like you used to do. About 3 weeks later, he calls me and says, man, I hate you. I'm like, why you hate me? He said, man, I went shopping. Me and my wife had a great time. We had lunch, we shopped, man, and the sex was off the chain, right? Now, that's a level of intimacy that he could have had at home.
Right.
If he had thought about it that way. So when I say being vulnerable, right, there's a whole emotional, my work is around emotional silence and not being able to be emotionally connected, which leads to vulnerability. But those anecdotes are things that little thing, taking time, hanging out, the foreplay starts when you say, let's go shopping, baby.
Exactly.
If you know what I mean, right?
I do.
But if you're not connected to that for whatever the reason, I don't like men, they say, well, men don't like to shop, you know. Okay. Well, shopping can be a whole different experience if you play it different.
Or if you
you know,
or if you know that the shopping is just the foreplay.
there you go. Or if you
Yeah,
think about shopping like dating, right?
right.
I mean, look how many relationships where people are dating and the energy is completely different than after dating, right? Like they stop dating when they're together or when they're married, you know. Um, and date night for us, for me, is like a really big thing. We date night every Friday, whether we go somewhere, whether we're home eating popcorn, watching a movie, whatever. And because that forces, we know it's coming and we prep for it one way or the other, or we expect it. Where in the beginning, date night was too, for my wife, she was my date at the time, it was too programmed. I ain't gonna do that. That's too programmed. That's not spontaneous. I'm like, okay, but we were 45 minutes away from each other. We both had kids, and I was trying to figure out a way that we could make sure that we saw each other and spent time. So if we didn't see each other for 4 or 5 days, we knew on Friday we were going to have a date night. And now that has stuck with us 8 years of marriage and 7 years before marriage. So I think there are a lot of things that you can do to figure out, first of all, what is the definition of vulnerability, right? The state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked, harmed, physically or emotionally. If you're familiar with Brene Brown, she says uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. You and I have talked years ago about the lenses that people wear.
Absolutely.
Right? And the lenses through which we see things. So there are a lot of anecdotes around being emotionally open and how you have to heal to do that. I tried to fake it once I understood that that was what my wife was talking about, but I couldn't fake it more than 2 or 3 days. I tried to fake being emotionally open, right?
How do you do that?
Like you go away on the weekend and you're just real emotionally present and you hold hands and you're really close and you're intimate and but it was uncomfortable for me because it wasn't real. I wasn't authentically open. I was just trying to be open to save the marriage. And I couldn't hold on to it long because it wasn't where I was at that time. I hadn't gone through the peeling back of the pain. I cried a lot. There's an emotion. You have to clear the anger, the hurt, the rejection. You have to process that. And you start to feel more open. You start to lessen the load, if that makes sense. And divorce was really hard for me because I never thought I would be divorced. And, I have 2 girls. I love my girls. And I like not seeing them. Like I had them Tuesdays, Thursdays, and every other weekend. That was way too little for me, given I was a traveling sales VP and I was in and out of town, and I remember I used to leave their room the way they left it. And I have kind of like one daughter who was really neat and one daughter who was not so neat. And so when you look in the room, you could see one bed made, everything in order, all the dolls on set up. And you can see another bed, the spreads on the floor, there's stuff around the side, shoes everywhere, and so that used to warm my heart because I said, those are my girls. You could tell the differences.
You could feel them.
But you could feel them. But I missed being able to come home late at night and them not, and then, be able to look in the room and see them, or go kiss them or whatever. And those nights when they weren't there and they weren't staying with me. And one day I was watching Prince of Tides. I was really uncomfortable and I was frustrated. And Friday I was supposed to go out with some people and I didn't go out because I was feeling really like, I don't know, in a funky mood. So I got up on Saturday morning, made some breakfast, and the movie Prince of Tides happened to be on. So I was like, so I sat. Prince of Tides was Nick Nolte and Barbara Streisand. Nick Nolte was away, and he called his daughter for her birthday, and she was about the age of my girls. Maybe she was like 6 or something, and she was having a birthday. And he was saying, I'm going to try to get home for your birthday. I'm going to bring you gifts. And at the end, she said, okay, I love you, Daddy. And that, whatever happened in that voice when she said that, just took me out to a long crying spell, because in that moment, I realized how much I missed my girls. And I mean, I don't know how long I cried. I was on the floor crying because it just was the pain of holding on to that. And then after that cry, I was free. I never did that cry again. And I felt like I took the whole weight of that off of me in that moment. And I went out and had a wonderful day. So, and there were other incidents like that where some trigger, some pain of something in the past. So you asked me, what are the anecdotes? I went to church, I did Bible study a lot deeper. I journaled. I mean, there's lots of anecdotes that I went through. And my favorite, well, it wasn't my favorite at the time, self-prescribed. I read romance novels because I wanted to see if I could feel what was happening in the book. I read a lot of The Message in the Bottle and what's the author? It's going to come to me in a minute. Nicholas Sparks. A lot of his books, right? Because they all had an emotional twist somewhere in the end and somewhere in the middle. They get you hooked on the great relationship, and then somebody dies or somebody leaves or something crazy happens, and but by that time you're so emotionally hooked, or I was so emotionally hooked with the what was happening. The Notebook is one of his famous ones, right? And that love story is a crazy love story, right? If you think about that book. So, but those are my anecdotes. I think each person has to either have their own, and, whatever their process is, right? When you add up all those things, the therapy, the process, the God, the wanting to learn more about the Bible and connecting to scripture. I mean, all of those things were things that I used to get to a place, in a different place. Other people, can use, there's other things. I was a warrior at the time. That's a whole nother story. I went through the warrior training, which is a men's training that I had gone through years before, but I leveraged that training in my work, in my trying to free myself to be more open. And then God put a woman in front of me that I was really crazy about, who was closed. So I thought I was done with my work. I was crazy about her, but she was as closed as I was before I did my work. And so I think God was saying, well, Michael, this is what you look like, and you're not finished. Right. So those are the things that I'm going to talk about. I hope those things help people look at themselves, because the biggest thing about vulnerability to me is self-awareness, and being awareness of where you are, who you are, and how you roll. Right. And I think the last thing I'll say to you, Lynn, is, or maybe it's not the last, I'm not sure what your next question is going to be. People say that vulnerability is a weakness. And I say that vulnerability is a strength.
I would agree.
Because I think it brings you can be whole and be vulnerable. And I'm clear about that. I'm crystal clear about that by action, and by when I say some of the things I've said to you on this podcast and other people hear it, or I say it to them, I can see their emotion in wanting that kind of level of intimacy with somebody, male, female, whatever. You can see it. You can see it in their face. You can see it in their energy. And that alone is another emotion. If you can feel, touch, taste, hear, see, your senses are heightened when you're more vulnerable. And if you're not afraid, let me just say one more thing. People, it's about risk. Vulnerability is about risk, right? What happens if I show I really love you, or show I really want to be with you, or show that I really want this job, if you take it to the corporate environment, right? The risk is you won't get it, or the person won't love you, or they don't feel the same. And so what we do is we play the game, right? So we're in this relationship, but I'm not really being my full self. You use the word authentic. I'm not being as authentic as I could be because I'm not sure what you're going to do. So we're doing the dance. You ain't coming all the way. I'm not coming all the way. Right. But so we're not really having the opportunity to have a full relationship and take the risk that it's either going to be good or it's not. It's either going to work or it's not going to work, but I'm going to be true to me. This is when the authentic, if I am vulnerable, then I'm going to be authentically vulnerable because that's where I am. That's why I say it's not a to do, it's a to be, right? Remember The Power Now, the book?
Yes.
Yeah, The Power Now is about just being. So I'm not trying to be vulnerable. I just am.
You said a couple of things that I'd like to unpack a little bit. You talked about encountering someone who was as closed as you used to be. But I find that sometimes people don't see themselves at all. They think they do, but they don't necessarily see themselves in the way they're showing up for others. And so, when you're going through a divorce and someone says, I wish we were more connected, or someone says something to inspire you to take a closer look. But there are communities of people who, just like you said, don't want to expose themselves. They feel there's too much at risk if I show up looking weak, or I show up looking overly sensitive and I'm a guy, or what if I tell you how I feel and you don't reciprocate? And there's always that possibility. Anytime you take a risk, it can go either way, right? But if you don't go there, you're never going to get all the juice out of the orange either. You're only going to get part of it because you're not bringing all of it. And so I wonder, you personally were triggered by the comment that was made and that started your journey. But have there been, in the course of that journey, because that was just the beginning, have there been things that you've uncovered about yourself that nobody said anything to you about? You just recognize them because the responses, the outcomes of certain engagements were not where you wanted them to be. And I personally know you well enough to know that when you don't get 100% that you want out of a situation, you do a recap, you do an assessment. Let me take a look at this situation and determine what didn't happen. Do you find that it's, I don't want to say it's impossible because I guess all things are possible. Do you find that it's common though for people, even though someone doesn't say anything to you, for you to, in those quiet moments when you're looking at a certain situation, for you to recognize something, but not know that that's necessarily vulnerability, or that's what prevented you from experiencing all of it, or allowing someone else to experience all of you? How do you continue to move along that pathway? Because and I know you say it's a matter of not doing it, but a matter of being it. But as you grow, you are making progress. You're becoming more vulnerable. You're becoming more open, Michael, if you will. How do you inspire yourself to do those deep dives personally?
Well, remember, it wasn't just what she said. There were also triggers in, separation, triggers in moving from one room, out of the room that you live in, to, another room down the hall, kids being at home. So it wasn't just she said those words and I go, oh, those words, right? It was more, there was actual stuff happening in the marriage that were causing consternation and struggle and strife and unhappiness and arguments and all those kind of things, because you're actually, I can't speak for everybody, but relationships take a minute to disintegrate, if you want to say that word, right? It's over a period of time usually, or you start to notice something. So it's not just words that were said. It's words and actions that took place that, forced me to try to say, well, what are we doing? Let's try to, can we save this, or can we, survive this and be in a better place? But I think it's going to be different for everybody. And I think there are, there's lots of books out about this topic. There's lots of people who are dealing with this topic, whether it's emotional silence or emotional connection, whether it's vulnerability. We are all different, and we all are where we are at the moment in time that we are there. And, I don't know what the trigger is going to be for every person. I can't speak to that. I don't, if there will be a trigger, I've done workshops for married couples as a divorced guy when I was divorced, because my some of my friends were first ladies, and they asked me to do their couples ministry, and I was really uncomfortable doing it, but because of the care that I gave them, my friends, they thought what I had to say was, you could help people prevent going down the path of divorce. And so, and in those workshops, couples are all in certain places, but there are some common threads in lack of emotional connection, lack of vulnerability from one party or the other. If there was 20 couples, 10 of them raised their hand if I told them what happened to me, and is that happening for them? And they all raised their hand, right? So it's a common thing that happens in relationship when people discover that one person likes a little bit, wants more vulnerability, and the other person is not. And people are in relationships trying to navigate coming together. And one of those topics, although they may not use the word vulnerability, it's more like my ex-wife said, I love that you make breakfast for me on the weekends because you're home on the weekends and you and the girls bring me the breakfast, but then you go downstairs and play with the girls. I'm up alone eating my breakfast. Now, some people might say, dude, the dude made you breakfast and brought it upstairs? That's pretty good, right? I might get some brownie points for that. However, for her, it was, how come you didn't sit with me, talk to me while you were eating,
I
while I was eating? I want more time, that kind of nourishment, right? And for me, I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do, and I wanted to see my girls because I hadn't seen them all week, right? So when I heard that, it was one of those aha moments again, right? I'm doing something that I think is showing vulnerability, yet it's not enough, or it's not. She needs something different. Now I could just poo-poo that, or I could say, okay, I see what she's talking about, right? What's up with me that I don't see it that way? What do I see? Well, the way I was raised, that was a big thing, what I did, and doing it every week, and then taking care of the kids. And the kids and I trashed the living room and cleaning up after them and teaching them how to clean up, and just playing with them is something other people don't do. So I thought I was doing a good thing. So I think everybody's different. Everybody comes from a different place. And what we need is the ability to say what we need. That's one. And then for the person to understand it. The point about understanding it is you still may not be able to be it, because you still may have to, you may have to do some work.
But it seems to
I wouldn't be here if I didn't. You got to do the work, and that work is, as we evolve as humans, right? You got to do your work if you want to be better at anything. It doesn't matter what it is you want to be better at, right? If you want to be more intimate, if you want to have better relationships, if you want to be more vulnerable, there's something you got to do if you're not feeling it,
Yeah,
it just doesn't. Yeah, I mean, that's the piece. The beauty is when you do the work, right?
The rewards are great.
You get the rewards are great, and you get the result, and that's the piece. I think that's the beauty of it.
You said something interesting just now that reminded me of a sermon I heard this past Sunday. There was a guest minister at our church, and he spent time talking about the power of the tongue and what you say. And it was interesting because one of the comments that you made was, even if the saying isn't to anyone other than yourself, when you were talking about your ex-wife feeling as if, I'm grateful that you fixed breakfast. I'm glad you're spending time with the girls, but I want to spend time with you too. But she didn't say that. And so he commented about even in our religious life, is he said a lot of times people feel like God doesn't answer prayer, except sometimes God's confused because we don't tell him what we really want. We kind of hem and haw about it and talk all around Robin's barn. And that's not even a person we need to be feeling at risk with, if you will. But I think a lot of times, a lot of the thoughts around what limits people from being totally open is that they haven't had that real vulnerable conversation with themselves. They just haven't gone there. And so I wonder during your therapy, if it was pointed out about how much time you need to spend with yourself, getting in touch with how you're really feeling and what it is you really want around.
Like I said, we probably have another podcast to do. But one of the triggers that came out of my therapy was the discussion that I had with the therapist when he asked me, "Tell me about your father." And in short, I told him my father was a great guy, loved him to death, took care of the home, worked every day, but he was a smoker. And he had a little bit to drink every now and again. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother lived with me, but she had asthma. So they relegated him to smoking in the basement versus smoking in any other level of the house. And my father had a whole setup downstairs. He had refrigerator, he had his boom box, he had his cigs, he had what he needed down there. And a lot of times people would come to the house, they would say hi to everybody on the first level, and they would run downstairs to see my dad because he was that kind of guy. He was the guy you wanted to hang out with. The man cave. And the man cave was damp and dark and dreary, but because it was his spot, it was a great place. And the therapist said to me, he said, "Michael, what happens when stuff is happening in your house and in your family, like what college you're going to, or there's been some crisis or something, where's all that conversation taking place?" And I said, "In the family room." And he said, "Where's your father?" I said, "Well, typically he's in the basement and they bring him. I guess my mother brings him up to speed." And he said, "I think you have a virtual basement." And I looked at him like, what you talking about? What you talking about, Willis? You know what I'm saying? And he didn't quantify it anymore. He just said those words. And obviously I was in the high tech industry, so I knew what virtual meant, right? And I said, "I have a virtual basement." He said, "Yeah." He said, "You're physically home, but you're emotionally sometimes in the basement." Now, how clear is that for an example of, so Lynn, when you and I worked together and I was closing offices, right? Mm-hmm. I was going to Virginia Beach to close the Virginia Beach office to lay the people off down there because we were consolidating. I would do that drive because I wanted to be the person that laid my people off. I wasn't going to have HR do it by email because I thought that was not the right way to do it. just send them a package and say, we're closing the office. So I drove. But I would come home and she would ask me, well, how was your day? I just laid off 3 people in Virginia. 2 of those people were my friends. And I would say, the typical day, we're going through the layoff, and I would leave it there. I was emotionally drained. I was hurt. I was sad because I had to do that. And I was tired. And those are just 4 of the emotions, right? But I didn't say any of that. So I was physically home,
but
emotionally in the
untouchable.
basement.
Yeah. It's interesting when you just triggered a memory for me. My father was military, and so unlike you, we weren't stationary with a support network of family close by. We were oftentimes in another country. This is before the day of cell phones, so you're completely cut off. You're not going to see or hear from those people for 3 or 4 years, right?
Right.
My father was a really strong guy who he was a combat engineer, so I didn't know what that meant then. But those are the guys that they send in before the SEALs go in to set up a mock camp, a mock station for them. They build some limited infrastructure so that these guys have a base, if you will. So a tough guy. But my dad was really willing to be emotionally available. I saw him cry. I saw him laugh. I saw him sad. I saw him run the gamut of emotions, and he was not uncomfortable about allowing the rest of the family. I don't know about other people, but the rest of the family to be exposed to that. And so my mom, on the other hand, was emotionally unavailable. And it's an interesting dynamic because of that, I had an expectation from all of the men that I encounter that they're going to be like my dad. They're going to be open, and they're going to let you see, and they're going to let you feel. But somehow I'm not supposed to meet them there because she didn't. And her thing was, you got to be strong, not strong in the same way a man is, but strong in an acceptable female way. So you don't cry, and you don't ask for more emotion, because that's too needy, and people are not going to be receptive to that. And so it's interesting. You had said earlier that vulnerability isn't a male-female thing. It's a people just being that thing. And growing up, I always felt much closer to my dad than I did my mom, but largely because she wasn't vulnerable. And even she would help me when I busted up my knee, and she would put whatever I needed to have. She would do the nurturing things, but not emotionally. And so growing up, I was always much closer to my dad than I was to my mom. And I never really kind of understood why that was. Actually, I just recognized it as you were making those comments, that perhaps that was part of the reason. She wasn't vulnerable, and so I didn't know how to relate to her in that way. And it's interesting, you had mentioned that you had talked to a friend who said his wife wasn't open to that, and so that's why he wasn't. That's why he didn't show up as being vulnerable. And a lot of times I find that people want to be, don't know how, and really cannot see themselves because of it.
Yeah. And, people are afraid of doing the work. See, some of
They
the
don't
stuff
even know
that
what the work is.
yeah, I do a workshop called Meet Me in the Basement, right? And the basement is that virtual basement. A lot of times people go to the basement if you think about how men use basements, right? That's where they go smoke cigars, have their drinks, play pool, watch sports, all of that, right? And we're chopping it up a lot. But I wonder what we're really, well, I don't even wonder. Oftentimes we're not really talking about anything really, really deep emotionally, right? Maybe on health, you know, there's some emotional pieces, cancers, those kind of things where we're talking about it. But, not a lot of deep level stuff. And the basement is a physical, when he said virtual basement, think about basements, right? We pack stuff away in the basement. If you think about um, when people have a basement and it's storage and we
Right.
pack things away, right? So if we're hurt, I use it as a virtual basement. We pack some of our pain away in the basement. If you go back to slavery days, where did the men put what was happening to their women and their wives and their kids and all of that? Where do they store that emotion, right? It's packed away. It's packed away. So, the virtual basement has another connotation to me about how we pack things away. Little hurts when you're a kid. The bike you wanted to get that you didn't get, and for some reason why they told you didn't get it. Sometimes that memory is still in your spirit, and you're 50 years old,
Right.
right? All right, and you're mad about the bike
Still.
today,
Still.
yeah, right, because you haven't really processed that bike. I had one of my clients talked about being mugged, male, and his clothes taken, and left with his underwear and had to walk home, right? He's never really processed that. The fact that he shared it with me was really phenomenal, right? But I think that's still sitting on him. So, it's like we're not running to therapy as a people or as people, right? So we don't process it. And as Black people, right, life is hard, suck it up. That's kind of the motto that we grew up on, right? Maybe that's not as true today as it was back then in
It
our
just looks
generation.
different, I think.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
But if you think of that, there's a lot of stuff that's packed away that if we can clear from it, we'll be different. So that's the reason I said about, when that little movie came on and I cried that piece out, I was clear. Once you're clear from it, it's not sitting on you. It came out of the basement and we got rid of it. Right. And think of that. If you're holding a whole bunch of pain, my last thing, because I know we're running out of time. If anybody's read Viola Davis's book, right, the fact that she overcame the things that she had to overcome, which, I mean, I don't know how she did it, to be where she is a demonstration of the pain she went through to get to where she is. So it's an incredible read, and much respect for her. And again, I don't know how she did it. I mean, her life growing up was just ridiculously painful on every front that you
Wow.
can possibly imagine, right? From not having any water for a week and not taking a shower, and the teacher sending them home because she stunk. What do you do with that? Where do you pack that away? What's the emotion sitting in a classroom with people and you stink because you haven't taken a shower in a week? I mean, little things like that you have to live with going forward, right? So if you don't unpack that somewhere, then, it can hold you back from, what you are trying to get to. So that's why I say it's the to do is to do the work to get that off of you so that you can be something where you want to be.
To wrap up, we've talked about the fact that you've got a book coming out. We've talked about the fact that you do workshops. I sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that most of your workshops are focused for men. Do you do workshops for women? And how can our listeners find out more about workshops that you might be offering?
The workshop, my website is Michael D as in David Burke.com. And there's workshops on that website. Most of the workshops I do these days, because I'm still working full time on the business side, mentoring businesses, are for people that know me or have heard a podcast and ask me, will you come do something? And they're not gender specific. So I do them for women, I do them for men, I do them for people. If I'm asked and I have the bandwidth to do it. So with the book, I hope that'll be my next phase of life where I can do workshops for anybody. And the book is kind of the piece that generates interest in the topic of letting yourself in, your full self.
Now, just for clarification, you said where your website was and that people could go to your website and see your schedule. And I'm assuming that some of the times when you're invited to do a workshop, it's open to the public, or are they usually closed kind of settings?
Yeah, most of what I've done are closed where, my church says, hey, we're doing couples ministry. Can you come? Or we're doing a men's retreat. Can you do something at the men's retreat? So it's more of that kind of thing, just because of bandwidth. So I haven't done a lot of public speaking workshops in that vein.
But I guess if they wanted you, that would be a way for them to get in contact with you.
Yeah, if they call me and that makes sense and I can do it, I certainly would do it. Yes. Thank you for asking.
Well, as usual, an hour is never long enough. And there's so much more we could cover on this topic that I know that I'm going to have to invite you back. But let me thank you so much for being willing to share your expertise and your understanding about the topic of vulnerability with our listeners.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you and appreciate being able to get it out. I learn as I speak it. And as you ask questions, I have written a bunch of notes myself for future. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right. We'll see you next week with another topic of something to talk about.